President riffing there on his appearance at the graduation ceremonies at the military academy, U.S. military academy at West Point. I do want to point out one thing the president has said that will make headlines. When he was riffing about the coronavirus pandemic in this country, there's a quote, "I said to my people, slow the testing down." The president doesn't want testing because it raises the numbers in the country and makes him look bad. And he basically just said that he instructed the people managing the pandemic in the United States not to do as much testing if possible. But once again, one of the central storylines in this is where the president is doing this, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the day after Juneteenth, the celebration of the final enslaved people who learned about the Emancipation Proclamation that all slaves are free, in the words of General Order Number 3, which was read to them in Galveston, Texas. And it has been a special holiday in the black community, and now broader throughout the country. President moving his rally to tonight, but still in Tulsa. And I'd like to go to Thenjiwe McHarris, who is one of the founders of Movement for Black Lives and one of the organizers of that organization, about this historical background to the president's rally and to his campaign. And I guess my question is, do you think this moment that we are seeing in cities and towns across the country, this uprising, changes the political dynamic that he is addressing right now, that he's trying to address for the November elections?
Well, first, thanks for having me. I think it does. You know, we are in a particular moment in history where we marked Juneteenth yesterday, a moment that in history where Black people in this country who were not alerted that they were free based on the Emancipation Proclamation were then alerted 2 years later. And now we have the President of the United States in Tulsa, Oklahoma, one of the most violent racial attacks on Black people in our country. And we are living in a moment where Black people are dying at such alarming numbers as a result of police violence. And we have a president who is calling protesters who are fighting for justice, who are fighting for freedom, who are fighting to protect the lives of their loved ones, of their family. And we have the President of the United States and his son and other officials like him, elected officials like him, calling protesters thugs, calling protesters animals, when we are across the country fighting for justice, fighting for an end to the police of violence, fighting for an end to the endless attack on Black life. What we see happening across the country is not just Black people across the country rising up. What we see is a multiracial uprising. What we see is people of all walks of life in every corner of this country and also around the world saying, stop killing Black people, stop police violence, stop the attack on Black life. And they're looking at Donald Trump as he prides himself off of what he did in response to the coronavirus. They see a man who is responsible for the more than 100,000 deaths across this country because of his inaction, because he did not take responsibility as the head of this country in the White House when he could have prevented the thousands of deaths. And you have people across the country that are saying this president's not just lying, he is responsible for the so many deaths, whether it's COVID or police violence. And so many of us are saying no more. You can call us whatever you want, but what we want is justice. We will no longer accept the attack on our people, and we want an end to police violence, and we also want to protect our communities.
And that is something that is being heard loud and clear across the country. Thenjiwe, I just want to ask you, the president has come down strong, both in terms of encouraging very strong law and order response to the protests, and in his rhetoric, and as well as his son, Eric Trump, tonight called protesters animals, the protesters for racial justice animals tonight. And I just want to ask you about what has struck me. The polls show overwhelming majorities of Americans have chosen to support the protesters. That would include people who probably disagree with many of their aims. 75% polls show support these protests. Now, did that come as a surprise to you? What does it mean for our country?
It doesn't come as a surprise. What it says to me and so many of us, that people are understanding and they're waking up to just the amount of suffering that Black people have had to undergo in this country. They are waking up and they're opening their eyes to what we've been saying when it comes to police violence. And what we see happening across the country is people joining us in the streets. And so for everyone watching his speech right now, he is calling children, he is calling family members, he's calling your neighbors animals, thugs. He is emboldening a police force across the country to shoot, to attack, to harm people that you know, people that you may even care about. He is pushing this country further and further into such violence that we have to now stand together across this country and say not just an end to police violence, not just an end to the systemic racism, but an end to all the Trumps across the country, a call for resignation of Donald Trump, but also a call that people like Trump that hold elected offices across this country who put our lives at risk should not be in positions of power. They are a threat to our lives, they are a threat to our family, and they're a threat to every single person living in this country.
All right, Thenjiwe McHarris, that is the political goal, can be achieved certainly at the ballot box, but is beginning on the streets of our country. Thank you very much for your perspective and your insight there. I appreciate that. Of course, the president, you can see, is addressing thousands of supporters who believe the other way, that he is their version of America, the America they would like to see. But once again, Tulsa. Let's talk Tulsa. We've talked about a little bit at 1921 race massacre, and I'd like to go to Hannibal Johnson, who has studied this and written about it, a book, Black Wall Street, and taken a look at race in Tulsa. The background to the president's address tonight, Hannibal Johnson, how does it figure into Tulsa's history?
Well, good evening, Terry. We in Tulsa are the site of the worst of the so-called race riots in 20th century American history. You know, sociologists and historians often refer to the early part of the 20th century as the nadir of race relations in America, the low point of race relations in America. And Tulsa really is emblematic of that period. We had a thriving Black business community here, entrepreneurs, professionals, just a proliferation of all manner of small businesses. That was destroyed in 1921 by a teeming white mob that came literally across the Frisco tracks into the prosperous Greenwood district known as Black Wall Street, burning, looting, shooting, and destroying everything in sight. So it was a remarkable tragedy that befell this community in 1921, supported in part by some of the leadership of the community at the time.
And so President Trump then arriving and Vice President Pence as well. We heard from our Marcus Moore that some of the Black Lives Matter protesters in Greenwood, in that historic site, really didn't want Vice President Pence to come. There was some talk that he might make an appearance there to recognize that history. And yet the protesters didn't want him there representing this president. What does that mean to you, that the people in the streets today are still living that history to such an extent that they would oppose the vice president visiting there?
So part of the concern is the genuineness of the visit, the seriousness of the visit, whether there really is a legitimate desire to learn about the history and work toward reconciliation. We've spent a lot of time in this community over the last 20 odd years really trying to move the needle toward reconciliation. That involves acknowledgement, making sure that we understand that this is our history and we have to put it in the curriculum. Apologies. We had a police chief, our former police chief, Chuck Jordan, made a public apology several years ago on behalf of the police department for the police department's dereliction of duty in connection with the 1921 Tulsa race massacre. And then atonement. What do we do to make amends for this historical racial trauma? So when we have somebody in leadership who comes in a sort of disruptive way and spouts rhetoric that really is divisive and antithetical to the notion of reconciliation, people are concerned about it, and legitimately so.
And I think that is what a lot of people are feeling. This is a moment when the country is taking a look at that history and our history more broadly, productively, counterproductively, in a clash of ideas, but seriously. And I appreciate your input on that, Hannibal Johnson, author of the book Black Wall Street, on this history. Let's go back to the president. He's been riffing still on his appearance at West Point. He had trouble walking down a ramp. He's been on that for a while, and people are making fun of the way he drinks water with one hand. He's defending himself from what he feels are caricatures.